The crippled man threw away his crutches and ran across the altar, screaming in tongues while thunder crashed outside Mount Zion Fire Chapel. 3,000 worshippers erupted in praise, some falling to the floor, others waving white handkerchiefs as Apostle Morenike Adebola raised her staff toward heaven. But Hannah Okori stood frozen in the back row, her blood turning cold. She had seen that same man walking perfectly fine in Gbagi Market just 2 days ago, carrying a basket of yams on his head. Rain hammered against the chapel's iron roof as Morenike's voice boomed through the speakers. "The Lord has spoken. The lame shall walk. The blind shall see." Her golden wrapper shimmered under the stage lights, and the massive coral beads around her neck caught every flash of lightning. The healed man danced around her, his legs moving with theatrical precision, and the congregation pressed forward, desperate to touch the hem of her garment. Hannah's hands trembled as she gripped her Bible. She wanted to scream, to tell everyone what she knew, but her mouth refused to open. She remembered what happened to Brother Tunde when he questioned Morenike's prophecies last year. His shop burned down 3 days later. Sister Blessing, who stopped paying her monthly seed offering, lost her job within a week. Fear was the invisible chains that bound everyone in that chapel, disguised as reverence, packaged as faith. The prophetess turned slowly, her eyes scanning the crowd like a searchlight. For one terrifying moment, Hannah felt those eyes lock onto hers across the sea of bodies. Morenike's smile never wavered, but something cold passed between them, a silent warning that made Hannah's stomach twist. She looked away quickly, pretending to search for something in her bag. That night changed everything. Hannah could no longer pretend she didn't see what was happening. The question now was whether she had the courage to do anything about it, or whether she would become another silent witness to a darkness masquerading as divine light. If this story has already gripped your heart, don't leave without subscribing to our channel. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling us what you think, and smash the like button. You won't want to miss what happens next, and trust me, this is just the beginning. Morenike had not always been this way. Hannah learned this from Mama Joke, one of the oldest members who remembered when Mount Zion was just 15 people meeting under a mango tree. Morenike Adebola had been gentle then, a woman who fasted 3 days every week and wept during worship. She had come from a strict Christian home in Ibadan, raised by a father who was a circuit minister and a mother who led the women's fellowship. For 7 years, Morenike labored in obscurity. Her prayers were sincere, her sermons were biblical, but her church remained small. People came and left. Offerings barely covered the rent. She watched other pastors drive big cars while she trekked in the sun. She preached about patience and divine timing, while her own bank account mocked her with single-digit balances. The breaking point came at a ministers' conference in Ipetu Hills. That was where she met Reverend Kola Bamidele, a man whose church had exploded from 50 to 5,000 members in 18 months. His suits were Italian, his wristwatch was Swiss, and his smile carried secrets. During a late-night session, after most ministers had gone to bed, Kola approached Morenike with an offer. "Sister Morenike," he said, his voice smooth as palm wine, "you have anointing, but you lack access. There are ancient doors that can be opened, shortcuts that our forefathers knew. Not everything is in the Bible we read in English." Morenike's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Kola leaned closer. "Power recognizes power. The spiritual realm doesn't care about denominations. It only responds to sacrifice and covenant. I can show you the path, but only if you're ready to pay the price." 3 nights later, Morenike found herself in a forest clearing, surrounded by 7 candles, and standing before a shrine covered with red cloth. Kola stood behind her, chanting in a language that felt older than memory, The ritual required something irreversible, something precious. Morenike placed her hand on her womb and whispered her agreement. She would trade her ability to bear children for the authority to command crowds, to speak prophecies that would come to pass, to build an empire that would make other ministers bow. The pain was immediate and searing. Something shifted inside her, not just physically but spiritually. A mark appeared on her lower back, invisible to human eyes, but recognized in realms beyond flesh. When she returned to Akoran, everything changed. Within 3 months, her congregation grew to 300. Within 6 months, she had to rent a bigger facility. Within a year, Mount Zion Fire Chapel was the most talked about ministry in the city. But transformation always demands more than the initial payment. Morenike began to notice changes in herself. She no longer felt compassion when people cried. Their problems became opportunities for profit. Their desperation became her leverage. And at night, when the world slept, she would feel the pull toward the river behind her estate, the water calling her home. The first time she transformed, she thought she was dying. Her bones cracked and reformed, her skin became scales, and she slithered into the black water with a hiss that echoed through the darkness. Beneath the surface, she entered another realm, the kingdom of the black waters, ruled by the entity known only as the River Matron. The River Matron appeared as a woman from the waist up and serpent from the waist down. Her voice was hypnotic, her beauty terrible. "You have done well, daughter," she said. "But power is not a gift. It is a loan that must be repaid with interest. For every miracle you perform, a life must be shortened somewhere. For every prophecy you speak, a soul must be marked for collection." Morenike tried to protest, but the covenant was already sealed. She had eaten from the forbidden table, and now she belonged to something that demanded constant feeding. Every Sunday, as she laid hands on the sick, she could feel the transfer happening. She would heal one person, while someone in a distant village would suddenly fall ill. She would prophesy breakthrough for one family, while another family's business would mysteriously collapse. The balance had to be maintained. Her humanity drained away gradually, like water leaking from a cracked pot. She became calculating, cold, predatory. The woman who once wept during worship now staged emotional displays for effect. The minister who once fasted for spiritual clarity now feasted on the fear and faith of her followers. But she was careful, brilliant even. She introduced innovations that kept people bound to her. The most effective was the glass of destiny, a small mirror she blessed and sold to members. "Keep this in your bedroom," she instructed. "Pray into it every night, and it will reveal your spiritual enemies." What the members didn't know was that these mirrors were windows. Through them, Morenike could see into their homes, watch their private moments, hear their whispered fears and secret sins. She would take notes, memorize details, and then shock them during service with revelations that seemed to come straight from heaven. "Sister Amaka," she would call out suddenly, "the Lord is showing me that you had a dream about a goat chasing you 3 nights ago. That goat represents your mother-in-law. She has placed a spiritual padlock on your womb." Sister Amaka would collapse in tears, amazed at the accuracy, never knowing that Morenike had watched her tell her husband about that exact dream through the mirror in their bedroom. Hannah began to notice these patterns. She watched how Morenike's prophecies were always about things people had recently discussed in private. She noticed how the prophetess knew details that seemed impossible to know. One Sunday, Hannah decided to test her theory. At home, she spoke loudly to her empty room about a fake problem, claiming her sister was sick with a mysterious illness. The next service, Morenike called her forward. "Hannah Okori, The Lord is revealing to me that your sister is under spiritual attack. There is a sickness trying to consume her. But if you sow a seed of 50,000 naira today, I will pray, and she will be healed." Hannah's suspicions were confirmed. She didn't have a sister, never had one. The prophetess was a fraud, but she was a fraud with real spiritual backing, which made her infinitely more dangerous than a mere con artist. The exploitation intensified as Moreniki's confidence grew. She introduced anointed water at 5,000 naira per bottle, covenant oil at 10,000 naira, and deliverance soap at 15,000 naira. Members were told that using regular products was why their breakthroughs were delayed. A young trader named Sadiq was pulled aside after service and told that he would die in a car accident within 30 days unless he paid 150,000 naira for an emergency altar sacrifice. Sadiq sold his generator, borrowed money from friends, and paid. 30 days passed without incident, and he praised Moreniki for saving his life, never realizing that the prophecy of death had been a manufactured crisis designed to extract money from him. Hannah watched Moreniki's mansion grow larger, her cars multiply, her gold jewelry become heavier, while the congregation grew poorer. The prophetess wore Swiss watches worth millions, while Sister Joke, who had been faithful for 15 years, couldn't afford her blood pressure medication. But whenever anyone questioned the disparity, Moreniki had an answer ready. "Do you question God's generals? The Bible says the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. My prosperity is proof of God's favor. And if you're not prospering, you need to check your seed sowing and your level of faith." The manipulation extended beyond finances. Moreniki began breaking up homes with surgical precision. She would call married men for private counseling sessions and tell them their wives were spiritual blockages to their destiny. "Your wife is a Marine agent," she would whisper. "I've seen her in the spirit realm attending meetings under the water. You must separate from her if you want to prosper." Some men divorced faithful wives based on these lies. Chief Danjuma, a wealthy businessman, not only divorced his wife, but entered into an inappropriate relationship with Moreniki herself, convinced that she was his God-ordained partner. His ex-wife and 3 children were left devastated, while Moreniki acquired another luxury property through his generosity. Can you feel the weight of this evil? If your heart is burning with anger at this injustice, let us know in the comments. Drop your thoughts, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed, because what Hannah discovers next will shake you to your core. Hannah knew she needed proof, something undeniable. One night, acting on information from a former church aide who had fled in fear, she followed Moreniki from a distance. The prophetess's convoy of 3 SUVs drove past her mansion and stopped at a secluded area near a river. The security guards remained at the vehicles, while Moreniki walked alone toward the water. Hannah crept closer, hiding behind thick bushes, her phone camera ready. What she witnessed would haunt her forever. Under the moonlight, Moreniki began to change. Her body convulsed, her spine twisted, and her limbs fused together. Her skin rippled and transformed into scales that gleamed with an oily sheen. Within moments, the prophetess had become a massive serpent, at least 20 feet long, with eyes that glowed yellow in the darkness. The serpent slithered into the river and disappeared beneath the surface. Hannah's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped her phone, but she managed to capture a few seconds of the transformation. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, and her mind struggled to process what her eyes had seen. This was no longer about fake healings or financial fraud. This was spiritual warfare of the highest order. She waited for 2 hours, hidden in the bush, mosquitoes feeding on her arms and legs, until Moreniki emerged from the water in human form, her wrapper perfectly tied, her makeup flawless, as if nothing had happened. The prophetess smiled to herself as she walked back to her convoy, humming a worship song with a voice that now sounded hollow to Hannah's ears. Hannah knew she couldn't keep silent anymore, but she also knew that exposing Morenike would put her life at risk. She spent the next 2 weeks gathering more evidence. She recorded testimonies from former church workers who had seen strange things, financial records showing the millions flowing into Morenike's personal accounts, and stories from families destroyed by false prophecies. The tension reached its peak during a Sunday service. As Hannah sat in her usual spot, Morenike suddenly stopped mid-sermon and pointed directly at her. "Hannah Okori, come forward!" The congregation turned to stare. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood on shaking legs and walked toward the altar. Morenike's smile was warm, but her eyes were ice. "The Lord has laid you heavily on my heart, my daughter," Morenike said, placing a hand on Hannah's head. The touch felt like cold metal. "I see that you've been going through spiritual warfare. There are enemies trying to use your mind against you, making you doubt what God is doing here. But today, I'm going to pray a special prayer over you." Hannah felt the weight of 3,000 eyes on her. She knew this was a test, a public warning. Morenike was telling her that she knew, that she was being watched, and that resistance would be crushed. "Repeat after me," Morenike commanded. "I bind every spirit of doubt and unbelief." Hannah's mouth went dry. If she repeated the words, she would be capitulating, accepting Morenike's spiritual authority. If she refused, she would be marked as rebellious in front of everyone. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. "I said, repeat after me." Morenike's voice sharpened. Hannah's voice came out as a whisper. "I bind every spirit of doubt and unbelief." Louder. "I bind every spirit of doubt and unbelief." Morenike smiled triumphantly and pushed Hannah's forehead. Hannah fell backward, not because of any spiritual force, but because she was exhausted, terrified, and needed the confrontation to end. The congregation erupted in praise, believing they had witnessed a deliverance, while Hannah lay on the floor, tears streaming down her face, knowing she had just bought herself time but not safety. This is the moment where everything hangs in the balance. Will evil triumph? Will Hannah find the courage to fight back? Stay with us. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with your thoughts. And make sure you're subscribed, because the climax of this story will leave you speechless. That night, Hannah made her decision. She contacted a journalist named Kunle Adewale, who specialized in investigative stories about religious fraud. She sent him everything: the videos, the audio recordings, the financial documents, the testimonies. Kunle was initially skeptical. He had seen many false accusations against ministers, but the evidence was overwhelming. "This is bigger than I expected," Kunle said during their meeting at a discreet location. "But you understand that when this breaks, your life will change forever?" She has powerful connections. Politicians, judges, police commissioners, they all attend her church. Hannah nodded. "I know. But if I stay silent, I become part of the evil. Those people in that church think they're serving God, but they're being fed to a serpent. They deserve to know the truth." The exposé was published on a Monday morning. The headline read, "Mount Zion Fire Chapel: How a Popular Prophetess Built an Empire on Lies, Manipulation, and Dark Covenants." The article included everything: the fake healings, the surveillance mirrors, the testimonies from former aides, and most damning of all, the video footage of Morenike's transformation at the river. The internet exploded. The video was shared millions of times within hours. News stations picked up the story. Former members began coming forward with their own testimonies of abuse and manipulation. The police announced an investigation. Banks froze Morenike's accounts. Politicians who had publicly endorsed her deleted their social media posts and claimed they barely knew her. By Tuesday evening, protesters had gathered outside Mount Zion Fire Chapel, demanding answers. By Wednesday, the building was empty, the gates locked, and Morenike Adebola had vanished. Her mansion was abandoned, her cars left in the garage, her staff gone. It was as if she had dissolved into air. Some said she had fled to another country. Others claimed she had returned to the river, unable to maintain her human form after the exposure. A few insisted they had seen her one last time, late at night, slithering across the main road near her estate, her serpent body as thick as a tree trunk, heading toward the water. The aftermath was devastating for the congregation. 3,000 people had to confront the reality that they had been deceived, that their faith had been weaponized against them, that the miracles they had witnessed were either staged or powered by forces that demanded blood payment. Some abandoned faith entirely, too hurt and disillusioned to trust again. Others sought genuine churches, approaching religion with newfound discernment and caution. Hannah became an unlikely hero to some and a traitor to others. Those whose lives had been destroyed by Morenike thanked her with tears in their eyes. But there were also those who blamed her for destroying their source of hope, even if that hope had been built on lies. She received death threats from hardcore loyalists who insisted Morenike had been framed by jealous enemies. One afternoon, Mama Joke visited Hannah at her home. The old woman looked frail, aged by the revelation. "I gave that woman 15 years of my life," she said, her voice cracking. "I defended her when others questioned her. I sowed my last kobo because she said it was a seed for my healing. And all this time..." Hannah held her hand. "You were not foolish, Mama. You were faithful. Your faith was real, even if she was fake. Don't let her theft of your trust make you doubt the God you actually served." Mama Joke wept. "How do I trust again? How do I step into another church without wondering if the pastor is another serpent in human skin?" It was the question on everyone's mind. The scandal had not just destroyed one ministry, it had cast suspicion on all of them. Genuine ministers found their congregations dwindling as people became cynical. The damage extended far beyond Mount Zion's walls. Chief Danjuma, the businessman who had divorced his wife from Morenike, tried to reconcile with his family, but the wounds were too deep. His ex-wife had moved on, his children refused to speak to him, and he was left with regret and an empty mansion bought with betrayal. Sadiq, the young trader, calculated how much money he had sowed over 3 years. The figure made him sick. He could have used that money to expand his business, send his younger brother to university, or build a house for his mother. Instead, it had gone into buying luxury items for a woman who served darkness while quoting scripture. Hannah continued to receive updates through Kunle. The police investigation uncovered a network of similar operations. Reverend Kola Bamidele, the man who had initiated Morenike, was arrested along with 17 other ministers who had attended the same rituals in Apetu Hills. Their churches, once bursting at the seams, were now empty shells. But Morenike herself was never found. The river behind her estate was dredged, but nothing was discovered. Her passport showed no record of international travel. She had simply vanished, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and unanswered questions. Years passed. Mount Zion Fire Chapel was eventually demolished, and a shopping complex was built on the land. The mirrors that had been sold to members were collected and destroyed in a public ceremony led by genuine ministers who wanted to help people find spiritual closure. Support groups formed for victims of religious manipulation, and Hannah became an advocate for discernment in faith communities. She wrote a book titled When Serpents Preach, detailing her experience and offering guidance on recognizing spiritual fraud The book became required reading in some seminaries, and Hannah was invited to speak at churches across the country about the importance of testing every spirit and not following blindly. But even with all the exposure, even with all the evidence, there were still those who defended Morenike. They created online communities claiming she had been framed, that the video was fabricated, that Hannah was a witch sent to destroy a true woman of God. It was a reminder that some people would rather cling to comfortable lies than face uncomfortable truth. On the 3rd anniversary of the expose, Hannah visited the site where Mount Zion Fire Chapel once stood. The shopping complex was busy with afternoon shoppers, their laughter and chatter filling the air where prayers and prophecies once echoed. A young woman approached her, recognition lighting up her face. "You're Hannah Okori," she said. "You saved my family. My father was about to sell our house to sow a seed at that church. When your story came out, he stopped just in time." "Thank you." Hannah smiled, her eyes misty. "Don't thank me. Thank God for giving you discernment. And remember, not every altar is holy, not every prophecy is divine, and not every miracle is from heaven. Test everything. Hold fast to what is good." The woman nodded and walked away. Hannah stood there for a moment longer, remembering the stormy night when she first saw the crippled man walk, the night that changed everything. She thought about Morenike, wherever she was, whatever she had become, and she whispered a prayer, not for vengeance, but for all those who had been deceived, and for wisdom for those still searching for truth. As she turned to leave, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the sky darkened with rain clouds. Hannah pulled her jacket tighter and walked toward her car, her steps steady, her conscience clear. She had done what needed to be done, and though the cost had been high, the truth was always worth it. Behind her, the shopping complex continued its busy hum, life moving forward, the past buried but not forgotten. And somewhere in the city, in churches big and small, people worshipped with genuine hearts, while others watched with discerning eyes, having learned the hardest way that faith without wisdom is dangerous, and trust without testing is foolish. The river that once hosted Morenike's transformations still flows behind what used to be her estate. Local residents avoid it after dark, and fishermen refuse to cast their nets in those waters. On certain nights, when the moon is full and the air is heavy, some claim they hear a hissing sound rising from the depths, a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with horns and pitchforks. Sometimes it comes wrapped in golden fabric, speaking in tongues, performing signs and wonders, building magnificent altars where the hungry are exploited and the desperate are devoured. But for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, the warning is clear. Not every voice that calls fire comes from heaven. Not every altar deserves your worship. And not every shepherd is leading you to green pastures. Some are leading you straight into the serpent's mouth, one offering at a time, one false prophecy at a time, one manipulated miracle at a time. Hannah's story spread across the nation, becoming a cautionary tale told in homes and churches, in market squares and university lecture halls. Parents used it to teach their children about discernment. Pastors used it to remind their congregations about testing spirits. Journalists used it as a template for investigating other suspicious ministries. And in the quiet moments, when Hannah reflected on everything that had happened, she knew that the greatest miracle was not the fake healings performed on that altar, but the courage that rose within her to speak truth to power, to risk everything for the sake of justice, and to trust that light, no matter how small its flame, would always expose darkness, no matter how deep its roots. The abandoned site where the church once stood serves as a monument to a truth that every generation must learn. that faith is a beautiful thing, but blind faith is a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. That desperation makes people vulnerable, and vulnerability attracts predators who cloak themselves in religious language and holy gestures. If you've watched this story to the end, you're part of the few who stayed to hear the full truth. Don't let this message stop with you. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts. Smash that like button, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this warning. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light, and together, we can protect others from falling into similar traps. Remember the lesson of Mount Zion Fire Chapel. Remember Hannah's courage. Remember that discernment is not doubt, it is wisdom. Question is not rebellion, it is responsibility. And when something feels wrong in your spirit, trust that instinct. God gave you a mind to think and a conscience to guide you. Use both. As for Morenike Adebola, the woman who traded her humanity for power, who built an empire on the backs of the desperate, who transformed into a serpent when the sun went down, her fate remains a mystery. But her legacy is clear. She is a reminder that hell is not just a destination after death. Sometimes it is a seed planted in human hearts, watered with greed, fertilized with pride, and harvested as false religion that destroys lives while claiming to save souls. The story ends here, but its lesson lives on. Be vigilant. Be wise. Be discerning. And never, ever go to anyhow church.